Everyone, welcome back to the Lookout. Today is July 6th, 2025. This is your Northern California wildfire report with the Lookout. If you're just joining us for the first time, my name is Zeke Lunder. I'm a geographer based in Chico, California. I've been doing fire-related mapping work and fire science since 1998, and kind of cut my teeth on this stuff working for the feds and state as a contractor on all kinds of wildfires. Started a contract company doing mapping during large fires, and we mapped in the last 20 years over 250 major fires, all with large incident command teams. And so now that I've quit doing that, I'm doing this full time. I'm using the skills that I built in kind of fire suppression info world to teach you all about wildfire. So thanks for joining us. I want to start off by thanking our sponsors and my chair when I'm rocking back and forth. If you hear creaky, funny sounds, that is just, that's my chair. I want to thank QTAC. QTAC builds small pumps to go in the back of fire trucks. They also build full-size fire trucks. They're based in Chico, California. They were the original sponsor. We've also got Water Axe pumps based out of Canada. They build the Mark III fire pumps, and also their pumps are used on QTAC stuff. And then Firebox builds skid steer attachments for firefighting, prescribed fire, and land management. So we appreciate all those guys. So we're going to talk about, today we're going to talk about the Green Fire, the Summit Fire, and the Butler Fire. There were thousands of lightning strikes on the Six Rivers, Shasta Trinity, Klamath National Forests over about the past week. Shasta Trinity National Forest had 41 fires that they've already fully extinguished. They had 2 that got fairly large, and they had a third that was kind of medium-sized, the Helena. So the Helena fire is kind of done. The Horse Fire is pretty much done. Green Fire is the last one that's really got some potential. And then on the Klamath National Forest, they've got now the Marble Complex, which is fires burning in the Marble Mountain Wilderness. And so we're going to look at the Summit Fire burning there, and then we're going to look at the Butler Fire that's burning on the Shasta Trinity National Forest. So jumping into our map. We've got the Green Fire here north of Redding. We've got the Butler Fire and the Summit Fire up here, kind of closer to Happy Camp. Oh, that's not the button. Yeah, don't worry, it's not critical. Just want to make my magic mouse so you can see it. All right, Butler Fire's up here by Orleans on the Salmon River. The Summit Fire's up kind of closer to Etna. This is Scott Valley, Mount Shasta, I-5. And down here we got the Green Fire, which is burning kind of off of 299 between Redding and Bernie, off the north arm, off the Pitt River arm of Lake Shasta. So we're going to do a quick update on each fire, then we're going to kind of get into some more of the specifics. As we mentioned yesterday, the Green Fire here, it continues to grow, and it's doubled in size every day. The first mapping we had of it was 96 acres on July 3rd. It was 225 acres on the 4th, 545 acres yesterday, and today at 3 o'clock it was 1,100 acres. So basically doubling every size, and that's kind of typical for a fire that's backing in continuous fuels. And so if you're a kind of fire behavior person, you'd probably we infer if something happened yesterday and the conditions are the same today, it's likely that we're going to get the same thing tomorrow. So barring, and main change tomorrow is that it's going to be hotter. But you kind of expect this fire to double in size every day as long as it's kind of behaving the same. It might more than double tomorrow, because if we look at how far it moved yesterday in the last 24 hours, and we extend that down, it basically is getting to this creek. And if it crosses the creek, it'll no longer be a backing fire. It'll be a fire that has some terrain to run with. So that's one reason it's been moving so slow. So The next day or two, we're going to see on the green fire what we call a slope reversal, and that means the fire then can run uphill. There's no firefighting. There's no firefighters on the ground right now on this fire because there's no safe place for them to anchor in. They tried for the first couple of days. They fought to kind of maintain, to establish what we call an anchor point. But there was, there's no kind of, we talked about anchor points yesterday, and you can kind of look that up. They couldn't establish an anchor point. This is really steep ground, and I thought a good way to show that would be to show just the terrain here, using what we call LiDAR. And it gives you a sense of just how steep and rugged this land is. Green lines being the fire perimeter. So you can see where the fire first started. You can really see how rocky and limestoney this area is. So the fire started right up here. It backed down through this limestone kind of jumble of a lot of live oak. And if you've ever worked on super steep ground on live oak, you know that it's like super slippery. And especially where you have shallow soils and heavy live oak, like it's really difficult to maneuver. And so they painted this thing super heavily with retardant in the first day and with first several days, and helicopter drops. But as we've talked about many times, you still have to get in there and have firefighters on the ground. And so what sounded like it was happening was they'd paint it, it would hang up, its spread would hang up in the oak litter, which is a kind of light fuel. When it got the retardant, and then a gray pine would torch up and it would fall over the line, and then the fire was off to the races again. So it was kind of impossible for the hand crews in the first couple of days to get a handle on this. And that kind of just, I think the terrain really tells that story. When you look at like this steep inner gorge here, and it's basically a cliff, and the fire's backing down through there, and you're trying to keep firefighters from dying. So they bailed. They pulled the crews out, and they've been using water drops today to kind of, and retardant to try to slow the spread of the fire, to buy time to implement an indirect firefighting strategy. So we've talked about this yesterday too. Basically, this is Fender's Ferry Road out here. There's a ridge, a major ridge system that runs south of Fender's Ferry. So I kind of drew in kind of a potential control box for this fire. That would use that ridge system. And I got a friend who lives out here, and I tied him in with the operations folks on the fire, and he's kind of helped them figure out, they're figuring out access. So they're talking to locals, they're figuring out there's a lot of old roads and stuff on this landscape, but it is also just really crazy steep country. So as far as trying to figure out how you could potentially kind of do a firing operation here, it's not great to come and do it off of Fender's Ferry Road just because there's super heavy fuel, and you can kind of see it here in the bottom. Like you see this dark green. This is conifers. This is like mixed conifers, so cedar and Doug fir, and it kind of hugs along that first like couple hundred yards off the road, and then above that it's oaks, and so that's nice. But as you bring fire down, you might get the fire to back nicely down through the oaks, but when it gets into this heavy mixed conifer right by the road, then it's just really difficult fuels. And I showed a picture of this yesterday, taken kind of right up in here, and I'll pull that up later. But firing off Fender's Ferry is not a great option, they think. So they're hoping that they can get dozer line in along this ridge system, and then do a firing operation off of that ridge with backing fire, which would be beneficial ecologically. North end of the fire they could tie into the shoe fire. And then there's a road along the base of the bottom here on Sullivan Harris Creek. I think that's Sullivan Harris. If you know this area, this is like Chirp Chatter Campground is right here. Really cool spot. So that would be the kind of the east side, and this east side of the fire is the highest priority because if the fire crosses Fender's Ferry, it's into more really inaccessible steep land and eventually into private timberlands. So super high priority for them is to secure this side. It sounds like potentially a bit lower priority is this side of the fire, just because there's nothing out here. There's no structures. There's prescribed burns that have happened out here in the last 10 years. Out in this area where the Forest Service has done, and they've already done a lot of planning to do major prescribed burns on this. And so I think from an ecology standpoint, it wouldn't be terrible if this whole area burned. However, that's 13,000 acres. And the Forest Service struggles with messaging around how they're going to use fire. And that's kind of the whole crux of this, like what's going to happen here. They don't have, for this first lake, as we talked about, for the first lake, another several thousand acres off of this fire. They don't have great options to control the fire burning on both sides of this ridge, because you've got this kind of undrivable limestone spine and no roads. And you finally start to get roads out in here. So there's a major road system. But as we've talked about before, like adding more fire on the landscape here is challenging. Right now, this fire was lighted by God. If the Forest Service comes out here and lights this whole ridge off, and then we get a big, strong north wind, there's potential to kind of ramp up what was already kind of, if the fire's just kind of backing down in here and there's big north winds or down canyon winds, potentially they're not like right up on top of the ridge right away. So it's a difficult situation for the people who have to make the plan. The main thing is they have to work with the resources they have, and they have to work with the terrain. And so right now the terrain doesn't give them a lot of options to contain the fire right in here. And we've seen that just bombing with aircraft and everything else isn't really working. And the fire keeps moving, right? So this part held for a couple days, but the other sides are burning. And also on this side, we're going to start to get slope reversals. When this backs down in, then you're going to get, the fire's going to be able to burn. So it kind of, like yesterday it burned out this bowl. Maybe tomorrow it'll burn out this bowl. And in between, there's a lot of backing and kind of beneficial fire effects. So it'll be interesting to see what strategy is chosen here. One legit strategy would be that since this is already been prescribed burned and it's slated for more prescribed fire and we're getting beneficial fire effects, in a perfect world, we could let it burn out here and actually tell the public we're doing this on purpose because it's the right thing to do. But the Forest Service is, they don't know how to talk with subtlety about this stuff. And I talked to the fire public information officer today for the forest, and he said, quote, "We are not interested in beneficial fire effects. We are looking to put the fire out as small as possible using a full suppression strategy." Politically, that's what the Forest Service feels like they have to say. And so I tried to get him to, I was interested in saying like, well, if the best thing to do turns out access-wise, resource-wise, everything else is to let it burn out there, what's your messaging going to be? And he said, this is a full suppression fire. We're going to put it out, keep it as small as possible. One thing that could affect that is if we pop a whole bunch more fires with this hot weather coming up and they just don't have the resources. If they don't have the resources, they don't have the resources. What I've heard from someone who's working out here today is that early on the fire, they kept losing the hotshot crews. They'd get a hotshot crew assigned, get them kind of up to speed, and then we'd pop a new lightning fire, and they would send the hotshot crews from this fire to that fire. That is normal operating procedure. This fire is clearly going to be large, and so it's a lot better to send your best firefighters to a new fire that's half an acre and stop it from becoming a large fire than it is to tie them up on a fire that's going to be large anyway. So there was a lot of demand for resources last week, and that affects the outcome. So that could affect the outcome here. Pop new fires. We might end up seeing that this entire 13,000 acre peninsula here on Lake Shasta gets beneficial fire. Already been burned, needs fire, hasn't had fire for a long time. And as we talked about yesterday, the main kind of risks of that are if this fire somehow was able to jump the lake and get established over here in these really thick fuels that haven't burned for a long time. So it's kind of an impossible decision for anyone to make. And when it comes to like picking between ecology and anything else, like trees don't vote. So that's why fires don't get let to burn, is because trees and ecology, beneficial fire effects, doesn't vote, doesn't have any political pull. Yeah, there was a lot of smoke today. I drove through Red Bluff today, and there was a lot of smoke coming off this fire down to the south. And that's another real issue about fires like this burning. We got a lot of smoke today in the valley from 1,000 acres. So if we were going to let 13,000 acres burn here, we are going to have like a negative impact on hundreds of thousands of people that live downwind. So anyway, between the 13,000 acre box down here to the west and the 11,000 acre box to tie it into Shoe Fire, a conservative estimate would be that this fire will be 24,000 acres. If there's aggressive attack to pinch it off where the roads begin here and keep it off this peninsula that really won't be damaged by wildfire, then maybe we'd be looking at 17,000, 18,000 acres. Like I said yesterday, one of the big problems is we're heading into a 10-day forecast that's got 8 days in Redding that are over 102. So that's green. I was just looking, I was kind of thinking of this as like if I was the person trying to do a firing operation down this ridge, and I drew out some lines. And there's just, when you start looking at the terrain here, like there's just all these very steep, exposed, you gotta, it's pretty mind blowing what fire crews pull off. Like if they're able to get lined down this ridge and fire it successfully, when you look at just how steep and crazy a landscape this is, you've got these like incredible kind of drop offs in these ridges where multiple kind of side ranges converge. And then if you're up there putting fire on the ground and you're trying to, hold that landscape, when you look at where we've stopped fires in the past, it's remarkable what gets done. And these new tools like LiDAR and everything else are really amazing. I looked over here, a buddy of mine who lives up there asked me he's like, hey, there's this road up this old ridge. And so I was looking at the LiDAR, and the LiDAR is really cool because you can see, like, at some point in the past, someone pushed a dozer up this ridge, and you actually can see that on the LiDAR. LiDAR is basically laser scanning that gets like up to like 10 points per square meter of elevation data. So it's like laser scanning the landscape from from an airplane. So that would be right there. That's a potential control line that would, that would add acreage to the fire if you fire instead of using this ridge, if you use this approach. But it's never been kind of a better time to be in ops as far as the tools that are available now to plan out operations, to suss out old dozer lines and stuff like that. These layers I'm using are part of, when you subscribe to CalTopo, you can get their Google Earth pack, and pretty killer stuff. So anyway, that was kind of the tactical scout. One way or another, if they burn this, as we said yesterday, they're going to have to figure out how to tie in this to the lake on this incredibly steep, kind of slippery live oak forest. So that wraps up the green fire for now. I'll look back at questions later. I'm going to jump over to Butler. All right, so the Butler Fire, give you a picture here. We're in a really remote corner of California called the Salmon River country. If you look at a little bigger picture, we've got Eureka here, Happy Camp, Wairika. Klamath River runs down Highway 96. And then at Wichipec it turns and goes out to the coast at Klamath. And then the Trinity River comes down 299 and through Hoopa, and it meets the Klamath at Wichipec. And the kind of forgotten cousin of those two is the pretty enormous Salmon River, and the Salmon River drains everything kind of here between the Trinity Alps and the divide between a Trinity and a Klamath, or between kind of out in the Marble Mountain wilderness. So this is the Salmon River. It's really wild, rugged country. As we talk about a lot, this is the fire history of this area. It's had an enormous amount of fire. And fire history is kind of the story of the Butler Fire. So we'll come and look at the Butler. Butler is a couple hundred acres now, I think. It's going to be a thing. So we got the little town of Orleans over here. Folks in Orleans were doing prescribed fire right in town last week. This place loves to burn. A lot of the native culture of the Karuk people is still alive, and they're expressing it. And there's been great stuff happening here for a couple decades with prescribed fire. Little town of Somes Bar down here, and Butler Flat is right here, and there's some folks who live here who also love burning. And so if you look at the Butler area, this area here burned in the Somes Fire in 2006. And then it burned again. The Butler Fire burned in 2013, and that overlapped with the Somes Fire a little bit. And then we had the Perch Fire that burned 2 years ago, and we had the Boise Fire that burned last year. So what we're seeing here is fire on fire. And in a lot of ways, fire on fire cleans up the previous burn. And so here are the Butler Fire. There were folks last year when the Boise slopped over the top here last year. There was extraordinary effort made to stop it. And people said, "Why are you doing that? We want that fire to burn into the Butler and clean up the Butler." Also, when the Perch Fire burned, some people were definitely interested in letting the Perch Fire burn into the Butler too, because if you wait too long, this burned 2013, it's been 12 years. If you wait too long, the brush gets too tall and you burn it again and you kill a lot of the trees that survived the previous fire. So this Butler Fire, not the end of the world as far as being a devastating wildfire. What we see is our devastating wildfires tend to be the fires that are burning into ground that hasn't been burned for 100 years in the middle of summer. So this fire here, Butler, growing slowly, spreading back down through this burn, cleaning up. And a lot of the big trees that have survived the previous fires here will survive this fire too. Obviously, one of the problems here is smoke. My buddy Will Harling lives right down here. He's been in wildfire smoke and prescribed fire his whole life, and last year he got a gnarly stage 4 cancer in his sinuses that was related to wildland fire smoke exposure. And so it's a real thing. No one loves living in smoke all summer, and it's like the health effects are real. And so it becomes kind of a question is like, would you rather live in a landscape that's beautiful and put out all the fires so you can live there and be healthy and lose all your forest? Or would you rather figure out how to put up with smoke and live in a landscape that has trees? Because in a lot of places, the choice is pretty stark. If we don't have fire, we're not going to have forests. If you look at all the land where I grew up, around Chester, everything else, there won't be large trees there for the rest of my life because we put out all the fires, and then we're just stuck with the worst fires that burn. Anyway, so Butler is like the Green Fire. Like the Green Fire, the Butler is doubling in size every day. And so we can just expect, as long as the fire's backing, it's going to double in size. And then we're going to have a slope reversal. This fire is going to get down into the bottom here, and it's going to run up this hill. It'll kill some of these trees. It's not going to kill them all because they've survived this before. So that's what happens with lightning fires. They burn for a while, downhill, really beneficial, low severity. Then they blow up and they run up the hill where they've got the terrain available for them. Then they back down the next range and they blow up again. And these things get accentuated by the weather patterns. So if we look at a fire burning for a month, there's going to be times when there's kind of high pressure, stable atmosphere. The fire is going to be mellow. It's just going to be kind of punking around under smoke. High pressure equals smoke impact because the atmosphere is layered, it's packed in, the smoke all layers in there. It's terrible. But it's good for fire behavior because it shades out the fire. There's not a lot of wind. Then we'll get a storm front that comes every 2, 3, 4 weeks. Clears out all the smoke. Fire can breathe. It blows up, makes a big run. high pressure comes again, the fire packs down. And so you end up with what we call the mosaic on the landscape. And you can see that here. This kind of blend of brush and timber is showing you how this fire burned in the previous fires. And this is, a good thing ecologically, having mosaic. There's also places in the Salmon River where there's just large areas that are mainly brush because you've had lots of fires, and some of them have been really high severity. But this mosaic is important ecologically. This is the mosaic here that we're talking about in the kind of Salmon River country. Fire's always been the tool that kind of created heterogeneity in the landscape. This is Orleans. Then over here is Butler. And you just see this real mix. Brush, timber, big trees, small trees, diversity. Right? People say pyrodiversity begets biodiversity. So you don't want all your fires to be low severity, because then you just end it like if all your fires are all the same, then you get like a landscape that's all uniform. So anyway, each place, each vegetation type, each climate has its own kind of fire regime and mosaics and patterns. So that's Butler. We'll keep an eye on it. It's going to grow more. Folks right now are prepping sprinklers and kind of cleaning up around the houses down here. Will's done a lot of burning like right around. There's a bunch of people who live right here in the Butler Flat. And you can zoom in here and you can see like these folks actually, this is taken in 2023, they burned their meadow that spring with a bunch of kids. School kids, right? So if you look at, if you want to check out more about that, check out the Orleans Salmon River Complexities Facebook. Putting it in the comment. All right. So yeah, good stuff. And interesting things happen over here. Like this is a real awesome, trippy part of the world. Like during the fire in 2023, as the fire was moving down here, Native people were burning their yards, and law enforcement showed up because they were doing what they've done for thousands of years to make their village safe, basically. Law enforcement showed up to investigate, and some aunties were out there with shotguns and told them to piss off. And they did. And they just put a big box around it on the map and said, do not enter. And that's how they dealt with it, which I think is, wouldn't happen most other places. There was not going to be any armed raids on the aunties. And so Klamath has got its own fire culture. It's awesome. They have a lot to teach us all. And we'll talk more. If you want to learn more about the Klamath fire issues, check out our Klamath videos on the Lookout webpage. Over here is the Jacket fire. And the Jacket, what often happens is if you have road access, it's a lot easier to get in and do something. So they had road access here. They got hose lays around this fire. They dropped a ton of retardant on it. And this fire is donezo. And so the last big fire up here on the Klamath is Summit. We've kind of been talking about this one from the get-go. This is up high in the Marble Mountains. Marble Mountain Wilderness is... it's named that because these mountains, they've got these cool limestone peaks. And... there's like the Marble Rim. So here's wilderness areas. So smack dab in the middle of the marbles. The Pacific Crest Trail goes through this area along the top of this ridge. We've been watching this fire for a couple of days and talking about how they weren't going to catch it mid-slope. And so you can see kind of the progression here. The fire made a big run the day before yesterday. Since then, it's just kind of like the dark red versus light red areas are places that the fire has spread in the last 24 hours. And so the fire spread a bit on this flank. It's barely spread on this flank at all. There were some spot fires out in here that have maybe grown a little, but not too much. So fire is really not doing a lot on last couple of days. It's spotted over the Pacific Crest Trail towards Scott Valley, and there's no new growth on those spots that were showing jumping to PCT. There is some heat map down here, and I don't know what that's. I don't have any idea really on what's going to go on with that. So we're kind of limited in what we can tell about what's going on these things by how often these things get flown. But this one seems fairly stable. Doesn't mean it's not going to, it was smoking a lot today. So we don't have great intel on exactly what's happening right now. The concern here is that this fire could get established in here and eventually threaten communities, Greenview and stuff around Scott Valley. But as we've mentioned, like this whole area that it was started in burned 11 years ago in 2014. Yeah, don't mess with the aunties. So there's quite a bit of wilderness up in this chunk of the country. You know, northwestern California is kind of like our own little Idaho. It's wild, it's woolly, it's got its own cultures, lots of different cultures, and a lot of wilderness, a lot of roadless land. I think I'm going to call it there. Someone wanted me to check on Madre. I don't really have much intel on there, but we'll fly down to Madre in SoCal. Not SoCal. Someone told me it's the Central Coast. Get it right. I don't think I've got a new perimeter for Madre. Looks like there's been very little growth on Madre, except in the kind of roughest, gnarliest sections. We were thinking that they might have to do a firing operation off the south end of the fire where the roads were, but it looks like the fire kind of like, if you come and look at some of this ground, it looks like the fire kind of put itself out by running out of fuel to burn, and was helped in places where there were access by firefighters, but there's not a lot of access here. And sometimes that just happens. The fire takes a big bite and then it is full. It doesn't have anything left to burn. Just gonna do our colors here. So any growth outside of the red line is kind of stuff that, like, this was mapped today, early this morning, and the previous perimeter was yesterday. So not a lot to report on Madre. Near Bakersfield. Fire's out, says Anthony Bracey, who's down there. Thanks, Bracey. Okay, I'm just going to look at some comments. Someone says there's a new fire on Alder Point Road. Ryan Stevens, who's a moderator here, says the red fire could get interesting. Let's see if we can find the red. Red fire. Alder Point, people say. It doesn't look like I have my map in for the red yet. All in all, California's got an amazing initial attack firefighting system. When you look at the volume of work that CAL FIRE does with their airplanes or helicopters or crews, it's an amazing army of people, huge coordinated effort. It's amazing how many fires that really have large potential get stomped. And as we talked about quite a bit, what always happens, that the only difference between a really kind of lackluster fire season and a huge one is a lightning storm. Multiple ignitions is when fires get large. Multiple ignitions, wind events, and kind of extended drought. But otherwise, you can have three fires with extreme potential take off all at once in California, and they all will get stomped by an amazing amount of resources. But when you get 40 starts, the ones that are the most remote, the ones that are farthest from communities, they get large. And then and people, I see a lot of folks on the Facebook saying, like, they should have put this out with helicopters on the first day. And as we were mentioning, it's like, well, helicopters end up having to do things like airlift injured firefighters. They end up going on initial attack to keep the next big thing from the next small fire from getting large. So sometimes there's limits, and sometimes there's no one is at fault. Sometimes people are all doing their best, and there's limits to these systems. So, and we try hard not to knock the firefighters. We will, criticize policy, and that's kind of one of our agendas with this thing, is to push forward policies that are realistic and not just based on telling the public what they want to hear. Because we know, based on our own experience in this business, is that, when you look at where I'm from here, Chester and Westwood and everything else, like, the consequences of trying to put out every fire for 100 years is that you come into these areas and there's like thousands of acres that are just burned to a crisp and now just like barren wastelands. And that's directly related to pretending that there's a fire-free option, that you can live on a landscape that needs fire, that's always had fire, and that you can just take it away and still have forests. And my experience in the last 25 years in this business is that that doesn't pan out, and that we need to have fire, and it's going to be difficult. There's going to be losses, and there's going to be smoke, and there's going to be tough decisions, but there's no option to not do it. So make sure you check out our webpage. If you weren't on there yesterday, we have a pretty detailed dive into the green fire. It's lookout.org, and we've got an archive. If you come over here and look at all the different topics, we go deep. We got a lot of stuff on here, and we're going to keep feeding it. And this is my full-time job, so if you feel like supporting it, become a subscriber. It really helps. We've had a few new subscriptions in the last couple of days, and we make all our money in 2 months of the year. And so if you feel like supporting us, you can do that. You can buy a hat or a mug or a t-shirt. And I try not to beg too much for money. Thank you very much. And I'm going to play our sponsor ad here again, and then get on with things. Thanks to QTAC, Water Axe, and Firebox. We appreciate your support. And if you're interested in sponsoring Lookout and having an ad play, reach out to me. There's a web link on our webpage.